When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Comedy channel. Today's video, we are going to be hitting Daenerys IX, A Game of Thrones. Again, getting to the back end of this book, and again, just a banger Daenerys chapter. I feel like some of the chapters kind of leading up to, I think, Dany VIII and after Viserys' death are probably the lower chapters of the book for Daenerys, but we kind of get back into the peaks of Daenerys and some of her more quality chapters in this book, and she has a lot of them. But this chapter I personally really love because it does such a great job of, not a lot actually happens in terms of the plot, right? There isn't a ton that happens outside of what happens at the end, but there's a ton of foreshadowing for the story, for Daenerys, a lot of character work being built here, and the resolution kind of Daenerys' arc with the Dothraki kind of comes in this chapter, and we'll see how that falls out in the next chapter with the dragons coming back into the world and kind of the resolution of that plot. But that kind of gets us into page 751 for Daenerys IX. In her dream, she hears Viserys telling her not to wake the dragon and going towards a red door as she walked faster towards it. One of the really big things that we're going to see with this open of Daenerys is she's dreaming, but she's going towards this red door, and it seems like, she can't ever get to that place. She can't get to home. And it's going to feel like something I think is really great. One of the best parts of this going later on in this chapter is, as she has all these encounters, as the dream continues, we're going to see, her tested because she's really in this place. And this is where we're at kind of with the Dance of Dragons, as well as she's kind of conflicted between finding a home, having peace, safety, and security, or doing what she believes is right for her family's legacy, retaking the Iron Throne because she believes it's her right. So all of that's kind of conflicting here with Daenerys, and it's something we see later on in the books as well. She hears Viserys again, but this time she is with Drogo as they are having sex, and she murmurs home and that feeling that she has lost. But then it is interrupted by the great wings, and the world took fire. Again, it seems like Daenerys' home, this sense of security, has been interrupted by the Targaryen side of Daenerys coming out, by the dragons coming back into the world. And that's even replicated even more because she's hearing Viserys, right? The one person that got to her more than anyone, that used her more than anyone. She's remembering her past actions of letting him die and, having to take that path of trying to maybe go to doing some extreme things that she may have to do in the future as well. But once again, she hears Viserys' words, "You don't want to wake the dragon." It holds a lot of symbolism for Dany. She is torn between her fate of finding home and security and conquering the world and taking the Iron Throne. But also, it's a clever way of using Viserys' words to mean the waking of the dragons, literally, not figuratively in terms of Daenerys being awoken as a Targaryen or, her brother and him becoming angry and abusing her. No, this is the chapter right before the dragons are awakened. It almost seems like a message is being said to Daenerys, wake the dragons. That's something that's very interesting, right? It's a dream that happens at a very specific point in Daenerys' life. It almost seems like this can't be a coincidence. And we talk about this over and over and over in this first book, especially. Every time Daenerys is in a position where she is in a deep emotional state, where she needs confidence or help, she always is remembering these dragons, or she's always having these dragon dreams, and she's remembering her heritage of Aegon the Conqueror and the Targaryen legacy. That's coming back to her now because she needs it even more, right? Her husband has died. Her child is dead. Now, she doesn't know her child exactly is dead yet, but she's going to. Let me rephrase that. Drogo almost died, but now he's kind of in a vegetable state, which she doesn't know that yet, but he wasn't looking good. And then Rhaegar, her son, also is dead. She doesn't know that yet, but she kind of feels that it happened in her dream. It doesn't really surprise her when she comes back into real life. So she's in a really bad spot. She then saw Viserys, but then she sees Jorah saying Rhaegar was the last dragon, heating his hands over the dragon eggs, but then he was gone, and the phrase repeats. Again, just to remind us, the viewers, as well as Daenerys, that everybody believes the Targaryens are gone, really, that their power is lessened. Viserys was a Targaryen, yes, but he was a beggar king, and Daenerys, well, people don't look at women as conquerors and things like that. It seems like the Targaryen line is on the edge of a knife. One misstep, and the Targaryen line will end forever. Now, we know it's not completely true because there are other families that have Targaryen blood in them, and, there's possibilities that Jon Snow and young Griff are trueborn Targaryens, so, But that really, at this time, was not at readers' minds at this time, and young Griff, probably wasn't even a thought of George's yet at this point. But then she saw Viserys saying, "He is the dragon. He will be crowned," as she sees his death again. But not before he physically abuses her like he used to. But the phrase repeats. Again, this could refer to the idea of the growing issue of Dany now having to wear the weight of trying to gain the crown and the Iron Throne. Think about what I talked about a lot with Viserys and why I think he's such a tragic character, is he felt the weight of the House Targaryen, of his family, and having to be this king, and he never was able to live up to those expectations, so will Daenerys be able to do that as well? The red door seemed to grow farther away, but she felt the ice and cold growing on her back. If it caught her, she would die a death worse than dying. She began to run. It seems like Daenerys is dreaming of the others, of the threat beyond the wall. How is Daenerys dreaming this? She doesn't even know they exist. And that's why I always have said that I think this dream specifically was sent to her, whether that's by Bloodraven, whether that's by Quaithe. I don't know who is sending this dream to Daenerys, but it does not seem to be a natural dream, right? She's getting things that clearly foreshadow what we're going to see later on in the story, right? Daenerys probably will be a huge person in dealing with the others, and she'll be running from the death. She'll be running from the others, trying to defeat them. But here it seems like she's not able to stop them. She's running away from that threat, trying to get to safety and home with this red door. Is this foreshadowing, right? To maybe Daenerys dies fighting the others. It's an interesting little note here. The phrase repeats, and then she feels a burning in her. Again, I symbolize that this means her child's death, as we know her child dies in the previous chapter. Well, I guess between now and the last chapter. But she sees her son with Drogo's skin and her hair and eyes. He reached out to her, but he burned away. Again, referencing that he is, dead, or he was never alive, really, is what Daenerys, or that's what Miri kind of suggests, but she sees what could have been. But then the quote changes to "want to wake the dragon." See, it changes now. It goes from "don't wake the dragon," or "you don't want to wake the dragon" from Viserys, to now it's "you want to wake the dragon. You want to bring the dragons back. You want to be a Targaryen, to be able to find safety, security, and a place to live." Ghosts seem to line the hallways, representing her ancestors, telling her to run faster, and her feet seem to melt the stone beneath her feet. Just once again showing that Daenerys is a dragon, and just the weirdness of this dream, right? All these ancestors coming back to her, telling her to keep going. Then a great knife of pain seemed to rip open her back, and she flew with a shadow of wings. Does this dream not remind you of Bran's dream that he gets in Bran 3, where he's being awakened, his third eye is being brought to the table so that he can become a warg and see all these things? Well, this is Daenerys' time. She's becoming a dragon. She's becoming a Targaryen, as we get into page 753. The quote repeats but gets shorter, just to "wake the dragon now." She flew as a dragon would, the cold and dark receding behind her, and she was on the Dothraki Sea until she reached the red door and opened it. But within, she finds Rhaegar. But again, I want to point out the quote gets shorter again, just saying "the dragon," as she sees her brother Rhaegar, who is said to be the last dragon by Jorah. He was in his armor that he wore at the Trident, as Jorah whispers, "the last dragon," and then she saw herself in the armor, symbolizing that she must be the last dragon. She is the last hope for House Targaryen, and she must bear that weight. But after that, it was just pain. She woke to the smell of smoke. She notes Jiqui, and the tent was in smoke and in shadow. She notes she was flying, but it was just a dream. Again, but just a lot of the same wording that we see Bran using after his dream. So I find a lot of comparisons here. I believe there was some manipulation done here with Daenerys that I think Bloodraven could have been doing, or Quaithe, one of the two, or the three-eyed crow, whatever you want to say. One of those entities seemed to be at play here with Daenerys. She asks for her to help, and that she needs, but she struggles to rise and worries what has happened. Her body feels ripped to pieces and sewn together with the scraps. Again, Daenerys has just gone through, having a child. Now that we know that child comes out deformed and things like that, but that's a very intensive process. I'm a man. I've never gone through it myself or anything like that, but I can imagine it would not be a great process, especially without proper medical care. There's a reason so many women die in this world because of childbirthing. So you can understand why Daenerys feels pretty fatigued here. As quick as that, Jiqui was gone, shouting for someone or something. She knew she needed something, and it was everything, but she did not know what. She struggled to rise, but once again, it was too difficult. Now, Daenerys is in a weird spot right now because she comes out of this dream, and the dream's telling her to wake the dragons. She needs her dragons, or she needs something else. You know, her son. Where is her son? Where is Drogo? What has happened? And you got to be processing this as Daenerys is in a really bad physical state while also trying to remember this dream and all the symbolism that was there. Daenerys is in a really low spot. They found her crawling towards her eggs, but Jorah lifted her up and brought her back to her bed, with her protesting feebly. Over his shoulder, she saw Drogo and Miri, but she continued saying she must and she must and has to. But she is kind of cut off as we get into page 754. Dany continues to plead no, but Jorah says yes, she needs sleep, and Miri gives her a drink that puts her to sleep. But this time, her sleep was dreamless. But after a time, she woke in the night. She could not have told how long, but she did not try to rise this time. She called for handmaidens for drink, and she was given water. Not much really to say here. Dany just needs a lot of rest. She just needs to recover physically. And yeah, that's what I kind of mean by this chapter. When I talk about not a lot happens in terms of plot, a lot of this is for Daenerys' character growth until we get kind of into the end of the chapter. She asked if she was sick, and Eerie noted long. Then Miri arrived, eyes heavy from sleep. She gave Daenerys wine to drink and asked to hold her dragon egg, but once again she was weary and fell asleep again. But this time she woke with her arms around the buttercream egg. She could feel the heat of it, and even as she traced her fingers around it, she felt something twisting and moving inside. Her fear seemed to be gone. Again, whenever Daenerys is around her dragons, she just seems to be at some sort of peace, or I guess her eggs at this time, because, you know, they're not actually full-grown dragons or anything. They're not out of their shells or anything, but it almost seems exactly like Daenerys describes pregnancy in this book, where she feels, you know, her son kicking, and she can feel her son moving around within her. She can feel that heat. She can feel that life within the dragon eggs. That's why that she has so much confidence in terms of the next chapter, why she tries to bring the dragons back to life. Now, one thing I think is key to understand here is the reason Daenerys doesn't do this already, like right away, and we're going to see something where she questions Jorah about it, is because she may think she's going crazy. Remember, her father was called the Mad King. Nobody else seems to feel like these eggs could ever come back, right? They just seem like stones to them. So Daenerys is in a spot where, like, you know, she's in a really bad physical condition. You know, her mentals are not great either. She kind of might be thinking she's going crazy in terms of what's going on. But that gets into page 755. Dany touched her brow as she notes the fever is gone as she tries to sit up, making her dizzy, and she feels the pain between her thighs. Her handmaidens hear her, and Dany asks for water and fruit. She asks for Jorah, Miri, a warm bath, and Drogo as the memories come flooding back. She starts to remember everything that happened in the last chapter, what everything was going on, and all of that. But she asks if Drogo lives, and Eerie says he does, but quietly and unsettling there. There seems to be something there. She's not saying everything. Eerie is giving about the quickest response that you can and doesn't seem very happy or confident about it. But at this, she hurried away for the water. She turned to Doria and says, "Tell me." But Doria says she will get Jorah, and Jiqui would have fled as well, but Dany caught her by the arm and says she needs to know what happened to Drogo and her son. She wants Rhaego. She wonders how she could have forgotten him. Yeah, it's just one of those things where I think it's very understandable, right? Daenerys is still kind of recovering. It seems like days that she's been out, and she's trying to figure out what all happened. Nobody's telling her anything because nobody wants to break the news, right? Daenerys has shown that she has a fire in terms of when she's upset or things like that, and nobody wants to tell a mother that your child died, and that, you know, your sacrifice that you tried to make didn't really bring your husband back either. That Daenerys is completely alone for the most part and has lost her entire family. Jiqui lowered her eyes and said he did not live. Daenerys let go of her and seemed to already know this from her eyes crying when she first woke and her dream of him. Yeah, like I talked about, there's a lot of heavy symbolism in her dream that kind of confirms that her son is dead, and Daenerys is just kind of confirmed by this. And I think if you're Daenerys, you're almost immune to this, right? You've had so much bad news. You've had so much heartbreak that your child's death, it kind of seems just like the tip of the spear. What else could get worse? And it's something that, Daenerys will deal with for the rest of the story, but losing this child at this time, it just feels like she's completely immune to it. But that gets us into page 756. She thinks if she had wept, somehow it felt like all of her tears were spent in her dream. Jorah and Miri entered soon after and found Daenerys standing over the eggs. She could feel their warmth as well. Again, this is what we're going to get to this point where Daenerys is kind of questioning if she's going crazy. She wanted to see if somebody else could also feel the warmth. She placed Jorah's hand on them and asked what he felt. And he felt nothing, a cold shell, but no heart like Daenerys had. Daenerys feels them literally inside them, but nobody else can. It makes Daenerys feel kind of like she's going crazy. Jorah asks if she should be up in her weakened state, but Dany says she is not weak, but she sits to make him happy and asks how her child died. Jorah says he never lived, the women say, but he falters, and Dany realizes how hurt he is walking with a limp and his loose skin. But not only that, right? Jorah has these injuries, but think about what Jorah's seen and the guilt he's feeling. These are all things that Daenerys is going to pick up on, but Jorah's the one that carried her into the tent. He would have saw whatever was going on in that tent. He would have been deeply disturbed by, what happened and the results afterwards and what happened to Drogo. He is still trying to process it in terms of the trauma and mentally what's going on there. And he feels very responsible probably for what happened to Daenerys' child. And he's also probably scared of what Daenerys is going to say. Daenerys is also going to put this together that Jorah is partly responsible for what happened. But yeah, so there's a lot of things going on with Jorah's mind at this time. Dany asks what they say, and Jorah turns away with haunted eyes, saying he was, but falters again. But Miri is not going to back down. She seems quite pleased with her work. Miri pipes up, saying he was monstrous. Daenerys thinks that Miri is truly the strong, yet cruel and dangerous one, as she notes she delivered the baby herself, and it was scaled like a lizard, with wings unhuman. Under its skin, it had worms. It seems unnatural. This creature, how could this possibly have come out of Daenerys? And so we have a lot of things to kind of think about here. So one of them is this ritual seems to, yes, definitely have affected Rhaego, because Rhaego didn't seem to be acting like this, days even prior to this event happening. Daenerys could feel the life there, and she's going to note that. So it seems like the spell did something, but there's also this other part of it where we know Targaryens have trouble with childbirth. And, because they've done so much incest, marrying in between their relatives and things like that, you've got to think it's a mix of things. So we've also got this idea that, when a Targaryen child did go to Valyria, they came back and seemed to have something similar. It doesn't seem like the extent that Daenerys' child did, but it also had worms and things like that. It's one of the big mysteries of Fire and Blood. But it seems like you have a little bit of that in terms of the Targaryens being from Valyria, in terms of their incest, plus also being kind of in this blood ritual thing that Miri kind of did. But Miri continues, whatever it was had been dead for years. But Dany refutes this, saying the child was alive and kicking when Jorah brought her into the tent. Yeah, a couple things here. One, the child, of course, was not alive for years. You can only be pregnant for like 9 months, I believe, unless there's anomalies, I guess. Maybe you could have it a little longer than that. I don't know. But also, Daenerys felt that the whole time there was life. Now, maybe it was a lizard-type creature that was in her womb, but it still had life at some point. And that gets us into page 757. But another thing you got to be thinking about is Daenerys is going to be realizing, yeah, it had life until Jorah brought me into the tent. So Jorah is partly kind of responsible for what happened because nobody was supposed to go in the tent. Now, Jorah didn't know that he was not supposed to go in the tent, but still. Miri says that maybe, but what was brought forth was dead. Death was in that tent, and Jorah refutes as saying she was alone in the tent with shadows. Miri notes long shadows, and no light can hold them back. Dany knew that Jorah had killed her son. He had brought her into the tent. She knew for love and loyalty, but still. And yeah, that's what Jorah is trying to basically refute. Jorah wants to deny everything that happened because it'll look better on him. He's denying a hard truth that he should not have brought Daenerys into that tent, even though, his reasoning was good, right? He thought that, she was the only one that could deliver Daenerys' baby, and that would hopefully save, Daenerys from dying in childbirth. It's a very serious thing in this world. So you can't really blame Jorah, right? Jorah, based off all logic, made the right choice, but It just didn't go the way he had hoped. Even Jorah seemed to know it as well, but tried to deny it. Even Miri notes death has touched him, but he made no reply. Dany asked, the only way you can pay for life is death. And she thought she meant the horse, which Dany is right to question, but she should have questioned this before. I talked about this in the last chapter. When Miri is saying, death pays for life, Daenerys doesn't question it, right? She just says, just do it, right? She doesn't ask who is going to have to die. It could have been 10 innocent children for all Daenerys knew. She didn't ask. But then, yeah, the horse comes up, but still, she should have asked more. It just seems very suspicious given, the information that Daenerys was being given and all that. And it's just this blind trust that she had for Miri. That's the thing that is her downfall. Miri notes she knew the price, and she told herself the lie. But I don't think this is the case. Daenerys at no point in the last chapter seems to think that it's going to cost her child's life. She thought it might cause, her death, right? She was willing to give up her life for her husband, which is a very noble thing, but she didn't think that would kill her son. And so that is where I disagree. I think that Daenerys had no idea it was going to kill her son, or she would have rethought doing this. But Daenerys starts to question herself. Had she known? But she knows she cannot linger, or she will be lost. And I think this is one thing that so many people get caught up with, that I think Daenerys at such a young age is very wise to do so. If you get caught in all of the mistakes you've made in the past and live them over and over again, you will drown in your regret and things like that. It's better to take those lessons from things you may have did in the past that were not so great. Take that lesson and apply it to things moving forward to make sure you don't make that same mistake. That's kind of what Daenerys has as a common theme in this chapter, trying to look past maybe errors that she made while also accepting that they did happen. She notes the price was paid. Let her see what she bought with their death. But Miri says she will take her to him, and Dany notices how weak she is as she needs Jorah to keep her up. And Jorah even notes this can wait, but Daenerys denies this. Yeah, Daenerys wants to see, where's Drogo? Apparently he's still alive, but everybody doesn't seem to be that happy about it. She exits the tent to the blinding world. She could barely see, but once she shielded her eyes, she saw what was left of the Khalasar, a small group of people and children. Her Khalasar have abandoned her. Yeah, and I think she kind of already knew this, right? Going through the last chapter, the Khalasar do not follow weakness, right? Drogo had fallen off of his horse. He was not really fit to lead the Khalasar in their eyes any longer. And she even thinks that her Khalasar has moved down to maybe 100 people. Where the other 40,000 went, who could tell? But Jorah does inform her about where they kind of went and all of that. She notes his Khalasar is gone, and Drogo and Jorah note he fell from his horse, and the Dothraki follow strength. Many different cows have declared themselves, and all left to follow this or that cow. It's very similar to Westeros, right? You have a king die in Robert, and now you're going to have a multitude of factions trying to take the throne or take power or avenging this or doing that. Very similar here, just for different reasons. The Dothraki are basically just going after strength and things like that, whereas Westeros, it's much more complicated, I feel like. But that's what's going on. Aggo notes the old, weak, sick, and frightened remained with those that were sworn to her. They took their livestock and slaves, but left some. Dany asks about the slave girl, Euroa. I hope I said that right. She had saved, but she was also taken, raped multiple times, and killed by another cow. And maybe we could see this popping up in the next book, Winds of Winter, with Daenerys' Pollen. She will be visiting a lot of these cows and the Dothraki. Maybe she will get her vengeance. And Daenerys swears a very brutal thing. She notes it was a cruel death and swears these rival cows' deaths will be even crueler, and swears this to all the gods that there are. Again, could this be something that we as the audience see as maybe it's justice that Daenerys does kill these people, but could she go a little bit deeper into it? Go more of like a Maegor the Cruel route where, it started as justification and we can understand why she did it, but it goes too far. That could be something interesting that George could play around with and do a callback to this in book 1. Her handmaidens question this uncertainly, as these people have more men than her, but Daenerys notes she is a Targaryen from old Valyria and names 2 kings specifically. And this is what is very interesting. Notice how I just got done talking about Maegor the Cruel and the way she's going to try and treat these cows and the Khalasar as a whole. She notes 2 kings. Aegon the Conqueror, of course, that's one she always references. But then surprisingly, she says she is also the blood of Maegor the Cruel. That's not something you usually want to boast about in terms of Westeros. He's named Maegor the Cruel. People don't like Maegor the Cruel. Me, I kind of understand Maegor the Cruel. I kind of like Maegor the Cruel. I think he went too far in a lot of things, but I don't think he's as bad as everybody says he was. It's very interesting that Daenerys thinks about Maegor the Cruel in this moment, maybe hinting at a crueler side of Daenerys that we may get to see in Winds of Winter because of, how she has to deal with hard situations, how she has to deal with loss and things like that. But she instructs them to take her to Drogo. That gets into page 759. He was lying on the earth alone. He seemed almost a corpse. His eyes were open, but not seeing. He seemed blind. There were blood flies on him, but that did not seem to bother him. Drogo is pretty much completely lifeless. There's nothing left of Drogo. He is kind of like a zombie, right? He's someone that's like maybe not a zombie, maybe like a dog, but a dog that has no personality, right? Like the opposite of a golden retriever. Drogo can follow commands, but that's about it. And this is kind of what Jorah notes, where Daenerys asks, why is he out here alone? And Jorah notes he seems to like the warmth. His eyes follow the sun, but does not see it. He will walk if led. He will eat if food is given, or drink if given water. But Daenerys kissed him and says that Miri's spell is costly, and Miri notes, you paid for life and got life. And we get one of my favorite parts of this, like, what is life? Because in a lot of ways, this part of the chapter is George basically trying to answer the question of, what is life? Like, what is our purpose here? And I think that's a really interesting idea because it's one of the best philosophical questions that we have in this world. What determines what is a good life, and what makes you living your life? How is that successful or not successful? How do you want to live your life? And Daenerys notes that this was not life. He lived for writing, drinking, her and her son. He was more than this, and Miri does not reply. And I want to read this from the book because I think this is one of those moments where it's one of my favorite moments of the entire series. Because what is life? And that's what we're going to tackle here. When will he be as he was? Daenerys demanded. When the sun rises in the west and sets in the east, said Miri. When the seas go dry and mountains blow in the wind like leaves. When your womb quickens again and you bear a living child. Then he will return and not before. Daenerys gestured at Sir Jorah and the others. Leave us, I would speak with this magi alone. Mormont and the Dothraki withdrew. You knew, Daenerys said when they were gone. She ached inside and out, but her fury gave her strength. You knew what I was buying, and you knew the price, and yet you let me pay it. It was wrong of them to burn my temple, the heavy, flat-nosed woman said placidly. That angered the great shepherd. This was no god's work, Dany said coldly. If I look back, I am lost. You cheated me. You murdered my child within me. The stallion who mounts the world will burn no cities now. His Khalasar shall trample no nations into dust. I spoke for you, she said, anguished. I saved you. Saved me? The Larazine woman spat. 3 riders had taken me, not as a man takes a woman, but from behind, as a dog takes a bitch. The 4th was in me when you rode past. How then did you save me? I saw my God's house burn where I had healed good men beyond counting. My home they burned as well, and in the streets I saw piles of heads. I saw the head of a baker who made my bread. I saw the head of a boy I had saved from dead-eye fever. Only 3 moons passed. I heard children crying as the riders drove them off with their whips. Tell me again what you saved. Your life. Miri Mazdur laughed cruelly. Look to your cow and see what life is worth when all the rest is gone. Let's talk about that speech. It's fantastic because in a lot of ways, I think as readers, we understood this, right? We understand, Daenerys, it's nice that you're trying to save these people. And we can see Daenerys' side trying to save people from being raped and from being killed. But Daenerys, on the same note, started this conquest. She wanted the Dothraki to go Westeros. This was the cost of it. And so it's a lot of Daenerys looking at her actions and being kind of spat in the face of that she didn't save anyone. Right? This woman and Miri becomes very sympathetic in this moment, right? We hate that, Daenerys has lost her child and Drogo, but you understand Miri perfectly. Miri has done what she sees as the greater good because she has nothing left. She gave health care to Drogo that it should have worked, but she knew Drogo would be too prideful, and then he basically got it infected. And then she more or less killed Daenerys' child. So in that phrase, Miri was right. There will be no stallion who mounts the world situation, at least not from Daenerys' line anyway. Now, it didn't really stop the problem, right? There's still going to be the Dothraki that are going to go with all these other cows, and they're still going to do the ratings and stuff. So In reality, she didn't actually stop much, but you can understand what her plan was. Miri wanted revenge. Think about your life right now. Think about wherever you are. And just say that you woke up tomorrow and everybody that you knew was dead. Or they were slaves. How would you feel? Like, how would you react to that situation? If then you had somebody coming over here telling you, you saved me or something like that. It really shows that Daenerys kind of comes off as a hypocrite in this moment. And it's one of those reasons that I love it, because the whole story, we understand Daenerys' side of things. And we see her as the hero of the story, at least early on anyway. I know a lot of people don't see her as the hero of the story, but she's one of them. And so we look at this character and we go, wow, that's a really interesting way of George getting us to think about what's going on here. And that, again, war is bad. Look what it's done. It's ripped away people from their lives, killing an innocent baker, like Miri says. Just a very powerful moment that we get in the books. And it's why I love this Daenerys chapter, because it feels like that conclusion to the story of Daenerys in book 1. I know that she has one more chapter left, but this one really ties up a lot of the plot lines really well for me. But that gets us into page 760, which I already read about half of. But Dany has Miri imprisoned, but Miri just smiled at her as if they shared a secret. And Miri is happy, right? She accomplished everything that she wanted to do. She got her revenge, and she got to put Daenerys kind of in her place, right? Daenerys may kill Miri, but Miri has, made Daenerys think about her actions and things that she's done, things she will have to live with. Daenerys knew she could have her head, but what did death mean to Miri if life meant nothing? It's a really interesting idea. Miri doesn't care if she dies. She doesn't have a life to begin with. They led Drogo back to the tent, and Daenerys bathed him and cleaned him. Eating in between, she wanted to sleep, but she had slept too much. She owed this night to Drogo. She remembers her first night with Drogo, how they had slept together under the stars in front of the Khalasar. Really the moment where Daenerys becomes kind of her own. She becomes a character that has confidence and is this Khaleesi type character. She remembers that moment, and Drogo kind of brought that out of her. But she remembers everything important should be done under the stars. And so this, she thought, should also be done under the stars, as this will be the end of Drogo in the story. She led him outside into the open night sky under the stars. She took that as an omen. She asks if he remembers the night, asking him to come back to her. Daenerys is pleading for any part of her old life to come back, things she might have taken for granted, the love that she maybe had with Drogo, or that she came to love him. And feeling like, all the weight's been put on her now. She has to be the person in charge of this Khalasar. Drogo's not there anymore. She has to become a leader. And she's desperately trying to claim to Drogo. The birth had left her raw, so she could not take him, but she could do other things to please him. But by the end, he was bathed in her tears, as he felt nothing and gave no sign of life. Drogo could not feel the love or affection that Daenerys was trying to give him. He was a lifeless corpse, more or less. And this is where we're going to finish off with the reading, because once again, an important death needs to be read straight from George R. R. Martin's own words. And when the bleak dawn broke over an empty horizon, Daenerys knew he was truly lost to her. When the sun rises in the west and sets in the east, she said sadly, when the seas go dry and mountains blow in the wind like leaves, when my womb quickens again and I bear a living child, then you will return, my sun and stars, and not before. Never, the darkness cried. Never, never, never. Inside the tent, Daenerys found a cushion, soft silk stuffed with feathers. She clutched it to her breast as she walked back out to Drogo, to her sun and stars. If I look back, I am lost. It hurt even to walk, and she wanted to sleep and not to dream. She knelt, kissed Drogo on the lips, and pressed the cushion down across his face. And that is the end of Drogo and Daenerys 9. One of my favorite chapters of the book. It's probably at least in my top 10, I think, for the book. Maybe top 15. It's just a fantastic conclusion to Daenerys. It's not her last chapter, like I've talked about multiple times in this video, but it just concludes that dynamic between Drogo and Daenerys perfectly. It does this great job of painting Daenerys, how far she's come and how she has to accept what she's done, but she can't look back. She can't, lie in all this regret and the decisions that she's made. The decisions have been made already. And she must become a leader. She must become the last chance for the Targaryens to reclaim the throne. And, I've talked about my issues with book 2 before with the character, and I think she kind of takes a backseat, especially in the next book. She doesn't have very many POVs, and she's also not a very good POV until kind of like the last chapter or two in that book. But I think, you know, we're going to have one more chapter with her as she is the last chapter of this book, and just want to take an appreciation. I've really loved doing Daenerys in this book. I have a newfound appreciation for her, especially in this book at least. And yeah, I hope you guys all enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one. We'll be doing Tyrion's last chapter. So we have 4 chapters left, I believe. We only have one Tyrion, one Jon, a Catelyn, and a Daenerys chapter left. But I will see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.